Welcome to the Houston Heights Learning Academy. My name is Ben Streusand, and I'm Advisory Board Chairman of the Americans for Prosperity Foundation, Texas, or AFP as it is known throughout the country. Today we're hosting a panel discussion on the future of education in Texas, with both our live audience and many other parents and participants watching throughout the state. We'll discuss the issues and the problems facing public education in Texas. The statistics coming out of the public school system in our state is disturbing. The statewide attrition rate is 26% for the school year 2011-2012. Over 100,000 students failed to graduate this year. There's a racial and ethnic gap that is dramatically higher than it was 27 years ago. The difference between white and black and Hispanic children graduation rates is essentially the double. Students from ethnic minority groups account for about 72% of all the kids that go to public schools in the state of Texas. So clearly something needs to be done, and what I can say, I think with certainty amongst myself, the audience, and our panel is that no one is satisfied with the public education system in Texas. First, I'd like to tell you a little bit about our host, the Houston Heights Learning Academy, which is our location today. They have recently been recognized as a National Title I Distinguished School for Excellence, and I'd like to introduce their principal, Yvette East. Yvette, please come up, everybody. There you go. On February 22nd, Education Commissioner Michael Williams will present Yvette, her staff, her employees, and the students of Houston Heights Learning Academy with a Recognize and Achievement Award. So, Yvette, congratulations for a fantastic job that you and your staff are doing. What I'd like to do is introduce our panel, and then when we've concluded, we'll take some questions from the audience, questions from the press. We're broadcasting this event live over the internet. We're also broadcasting via some cable television channels. So this is a live event, so we want to make sure we keep everybody's questions very short and precise so that our panelists can answer the questions. And we also, what we'd like to do is take questions from our audience that is watching this event live. So we've got our computer people that are going to be receiving questions and funneling them to me, and then I'll be asking the panel various questions. So what I'd like to do now is introduce our panel. First, I'd like to introduce Dan Patrick. Since his election to the State Senate in 2007, he's been recognized twice as Legislator of the Year. He recently received the National Association of Business Top Award. The Austin American Statesman recently named him as one of the most influential Republicans and legislators in the state of Texas. He also happens to chair the Senate Education Committee, which will determine the reforms that are adopted by the state legislature and enacted in our public schools. He's on 13 other committees. Dan is a successful television and radio broadcaster, author, and currently serves as the managing partner of radio station KSEV, the Voice of Texas. So please give Dan a round of applause and thank you for attending. Next, I would like to introduce former City Councilman in Washington, D.C., and leader of the reform movement in the Washington, D.C. public schools, Kevin Chavous. In 2003, Kevin and the mayor publicly supported a very controversial proposal by President George W. Bush and Education Secretary Rod Paige for a federal school voucher program designed for low-income district school children. The program was part of a much larger initiative which allowed students in Washington, D.C. public schools access to charter schools and vouchers. While the voucher program was in place, they successfully educated thousands of D.C. school children. Since leaving the City Council, Kevin has emerged as a leader in the national education reform movement. He's a distinguished fellow at the Center for Education Reform, and he is the author of a book, Serving Our Children, Charter Schools, and the Reform of American Public Education. Please help me in welcoming Kevin Chavous. And our final panelist today is someone who's very well known to those of us in the education establishment, which I include myself, in Houston, is former Secretary of Education under George W. Bush, Rod Paige. He served from 2001 to 2005. As Secretary, he was an advocate of student achievement in employing best-of-breed solutions to achieve results and trying to raise national standards throughout the country. He was also Dean of the College of Education at Texas Southern University. As I said, he's the former superintendent of the Houston Independent School District. In 2001, he was named National Superintendent of the Year by the American School Association. He has authored numerous books, too many to recount now, but I will mention one of the bestsellers, The War Against Hope, Why Teachers' Unions Hurt. More recently, he published The Black-White Achievement Gap, Why Closing the Gap is the Greatest of Civil Rights. So please help me in welcoming former Secretary Rod Paige to our panel. So as I said before, our main focus will be to ask our panel to tell us what, in their opinion, works, what does not work, and why. When we conclude, we'll take questions from our live audience, our viewers at home, and the press. First up, Senator Dan Patrick will lay out his reform agenda for the state of Texas. Dan?
Thank you, Ben. Good afternoon, everyone, and those watching and listening. And let me just say very quickly, forgive me for not being dressed with my fellow panelist here. My mom, who's 86, lives by herself, fell yesterday, went to the hospital, and I went right there to help her, and I've been there the last 48 hours, and so didn't have any other clothes with me, so forgive me for my casual attire. But she's doing fine. Broke a few bones, but she'll be fine. Strong at 86. Let's talk about education this session. We're looking at 5 main goals, and that is innovation, rigor, transparency, flexibility, and empowerment. And when I talk about empowerment, I'm talking about empowerment for parents, for students, for teachers, for principals, for superintendents. I believe that our system is too rigid now, trying to make every student fit in the same box. Every student should have the opportunity to go to college. Not every student will go to a 4-year university. In fact, less than 30% of all Texas high school graduates complete a 4-year degree within 6 years. So we have to be sure we have a broad spectrum of opportunities in our public school system and our public charter system for every student. Whether they want to go directly into the workforce, whether they want to go to community college, whether they want to get a certificate, or whether they want to go to a 4-year university or beyond. Secondly, let's take a look at the numbers. We have 5.7 million students approximately in Texas schools. Of those, close to 5 million are in public schools. The next largest category would be about 300,000 homeschooled as an estimate, about 250,000 in private schools. We have about 150,000 in public charters and about 100,000 on the wait list. That's about 10%, a little bit more than all the students in America. The Houston Endowment did a study recently, again, tying back to my numbers about students graduating from college in 6 years with a 4-year degree. But the Houston Endowment did a study recently showing that only 21% of all 8th graders go beyond high school to get some type of certificate or diploma. And of those numbers, it's only 10% of the African American population and 11% of the Latino population. But total, 21%, at a time when 80% of all jobs in America and Texas require some type of additional learning after school, we surely are not meeting those numbers. I was in Washington recently and heard Condoleezza Rice speak. And what she said was, and I asked her if I could use the phrase, and she was kind enough to say, feel free. She said, we don't need an evolution in education, we need a revolution. Not that we can't spend dollars in a strategic manner to fix our public schools where needed. But in the time it takes to fix schools, what happens to those students in those schools at that time? So that's why charters and choice are needed. Lastly, as I kind of wrap up this segment, we'll move forward. If we look at our 8,500 plus campuses in Texas, K through 12, we have about 500 campuses that are rated failures by the state of Texas. Now, we are looking with Commissioner Michael Williams at our accountability system so that schools are not rated a failure because of one demographic cell in one area. So we need to be sure the accountability system is right. It should focus on our test scores, it should focus on growth, and a number of factors that, quite frankly, are not in the accountability system accurately now. But the bottom line is 500 campuses we consider in the state that are failures, and they teach over 300,000 students. So how do we expect a student to achieve success or even graduate when they are locked into a zip code of a school we say is a failure? So we have a broad-based reform package this session. We're focusing on charters. We need to lift the cap on charters. We need full facility funding of charters, and we need an independent authorizer in the state of Texas so that we have charters that are quality charters when they're approved. Secondly, we need to be sure we remove the barrier from out-of-state successful charters coming into Texas. In the past, there have been some rules in place under the former commissioner and staff that really made it difficult for successful out-of-state charters coming into Texas. We are removing those rules as we speak, and I appreciate the governor's help in doing that along with Commissioner Williams. Next, we're looking at career business. Currently in Texas, you have 3 degrees when you graduate: distinguished, recommended, and minimum. We're going to remove the minimum. We're going with I will lay out Senate Bill 3 in a hearing on Tuesday, a 1 diploma with endorsements for career business, for STEM, for humanities, and distinguished. We want to keep the rigor and accountability, but I want to lift up the career business aspect of our students, be sure they have the opportunity to go to college, but also give them more flexibility in their electives so that they can specialize in certain areas. Another thing I'd like to do is remove the ban where schools are tied into a certain community college for dual credit. When I talked with Terry Greer from HISD, one of the things that Dr. Greer said, Dan, we might like to do a dual credit in our career business area with another community college because that community college might have a better course than the one we're in. And that would create competition in our community colleges to create better dual credit courses. Right now, schools are not allowed to do that. That's going to be a big fight. We want to change that. And then I want to look at choice. We need a parent trigger. We have it in Texas right now, but it takes 6 years to close down a school. It should be reduced to 2. Close down the poor-performing public schools and the poor-performing public charters. We need only the best schools, no matter what those schools are. So give the parents the opportunity. We need a recovery school district that the commissioner can come in and take over these poor-performing schools, similar to what they have in Louisiana. We want to have choice where students can go to any school in the district or out of the district. We are looking at a business tax scholarship program for those students who can't find a charter, who can't find that public school, who need that extra opportunity to go to a specific school. I want a choice for students with severe disabilities to allow them to go where their parents need to send them. And we need online learning. Blended online learning is the wave of the future, but we need to have the checks and balances within that system to be sure that we're monitoring what are on our online courses. So it's a big, broad package. It's online blended learning. It's online learning. It's choice of many varieties. It's lifting the cap on charters. It's creating flexibility for all involved. If we do these things, along with one of the most important things that has turned out to work in other states, changing our accountability system to an A through F rating, because teachers know, or students know, when they're parents know when their children are in an F school what that means. Right now, unacceptable, acceptable, recognized, exemplary, all those things kind of get lost in the haze. So this is a big, bold package. I'm going to need the help of the public. We need to support public education. At the end of the day, between public charters and traditional public schools, that's where almost 95% of all students will go. But let's be sure we have choice for that other 5, 6, 7, 8, 9% of students who need another avenue to success. You can't live the American dream without a good job, and you can't get a good job without a great education.
Thank you, Senator. Next, I'd like to have Kevin Chavous talk a little bit about his experiences in Washington, D.C. and reforming the public school system there. Also his experiences in Louisiana, and he's been on the forefront of education reform in other parts of the country as well. Kevin, thank you.
Well, thank you, Ben, and I'm glad to be here, and I want to give another shout out to our superintendent. It's always good to be in a well-run school. We need more of them, so we cannot sing your praises enough. And I want to also acknowledge and let you know how proud I am to be with former Secretary Paige, who I count as a dear friend. We've worked closely together in putting the DC Opportunity Scholarship Program in place. I remember meetings in his office when he finally said to me, look, Kevin, what do you believe in? What do you think is best for these kids? And at the end of the day, that should govern all of our activities and all of our beliefs as it relates to education policy. And then Senator Patrick, you know, listen to you, I remember when I was in office, because I'm a recovering politician myself, and I remember, you know, the feeling that I know you must feel, that you only have a certain window of time, so you want to get as much done as possible. And so the broad-based reforms you're talking about, they matter. But the way I like to describe what we're undertaking in a way that most people understand is we've got to fly the plane at the same time as we fix it. Many of the broad-based reforms that Senator Patrick's talking about, the institutional, the bureaucratic changes, the nomenclature, the grading of schools, the accountability, you know, he's going to give it a good shot, but many of those things will take a while. And that's the fix-it part. But we still got to fly that sucker. And let me tell you, the only way you can save children now, give them an opportunity to meet their full potential, give them the education they rightly deserve as American citizens, is through educational choice. And in my experience, starting in DC, the work we've done in Louisiana and Indiana, where I was born and raised, you know, now we see in the offing in Tennessee and North Carolina, these efforts to have statewide private school choice programs, working with a robust charter movement, working with emerging virtual digital education opportunities, working with aggressive opportunities for parents to homeschool their children, which is, like in Texas, it's the same all over the country, the fastest growing form of school choice is homeschooling. When you have all that in place, then you start to see change. And it's a twofold benefit. One is you help kids now. I mean, when we started the charter movement in DC, we thought, okay, now we're making a difference. But before long, we put in place some of the best charter schools in the country, and now, 14 years later, DC public school kids, nearly 45% of them are in charter schools. So, you know, and over the next few years, it'll be over 50%. And so there was this real demand, but there was a waiting list. So when Secretary Paige and I worked with President Bush and Mayor Williams in DC on the Opportunity Scholarship Program, we wanted to deal with those kids and those families who were on the waiting list, who still were told, we're going to fix DC public schools, it's going to take 4 or 5 years. And the average parent said, we don't have 4 or 5 years to wait. And what happened in DC, we have nearly 2,000 kids going to private schools of their parents' choice. A couple go to school with Sasha and Malia as Sidwell friends. 94%, and Rod, you should be proud of this, 94% graduation rate, 40 points higher than DC public schools. 89% of those kids go to college. An unheard of statistic, and many of those kids would have been lost. So we do have to figure out how to fly the plane while we fix it. And there are 2 reasons why this is important. First, if you want to fix the plane, don't think you can do it without choice. No school bureaucracy has ever reformed itself from within. They never have, they never will. The only way school bureaucracies will reform is through external pressure. And the best form of external pressure on a bureaucracy is educational choice. And the proof is in the pudding. Nowhere has reform kicked in without educational choice. Look at Milwaukee. that has the most robust educational choice program in the country, 100,000 school-age students. You've got 50,000 of those kids in Milwaukee public schools, 30,000 in the scholarship program, the voucher program, 20,000 in charter schools. And from 2003 to 2010, their graduation rate for Milwaukee public schools went from 49% to 70% because of the competition associated with the other options for parents. In Florida, all of a sudden with the reforms that Governor Jeb Bush put in place from 1998 to 2007, the fourth grade performance went from 53% proficiency to 71%. And you know why? They had 50,000 kids in the tax credit program. They had a robust charter movement. They were grading these schools, and all of a sudden the changes were put in place. Now we're seeing statewide scholarship programs in Indiana and Louisiana. Within a matter of 2 to 3 weeks in Louisiana, when they passed their voucher bill, 400,000 families eligible. They had 10,000 parents rush to apply. They only had a couple weeks to sign up. 10,000 families signed up. In Indiana, and they're in their second year, they've got 10,000 students enrolled. And guess what? In Indiana, they really are beginning to see IPS, Indianapolis Public Schools, come to the forefront. They have run Indianapolis Public Schools billboards in Indiana saying we can educate your kids too. Have you ever seen a local public school district run billboards advertising to try to entice parents to enroll their kids in the neighborhood school? That's what choice does. It empowers parents and families, and more than anything, it jumpstarts the reforms we all say we want 30 years after a nation in risk, where they said that we're doomed as a society if we don't fix education. And what have we done in 30 years? We've been there, done that. Education gap is still growing. Every day, 7,000 kids drop out of school. Before I finish this sentence, a child will drop out of school in America. That's 30 years after they warned us about the problem or challenges associated with us not equalizing educational opportunities in this country. So, you know, from my point of view, what Senator Patrick doing is something we should applaud. There's one other thing before I turn over to my leader. You know, I go from state to state. Yes, it's you. I go from state to state because this has become my life's work. And I'm often, and I don't know if any media here is going to ask me this question, but I'm often asked, well, you know, you're a Democrat, why are you talking this stuff that Republicans talk about? And I say, you know what, let me tell you something. I don't know of any Republican or Democratic way to teach a kid how to read, write, or count. I don't know. When Miss Shelton had me in the first grade, my favorite teacher of all time, and she was teaching me how to read and telling me I was the smartest thing since sliced bread, I didn't know what her party affiliation was. And I left first grade thinking I could do anything because of Miss Shelton. And what we need to make sure is we depoliticize this issue. This is not about who is promoting the reform. It's about making sure we have reform for these kids. That's what it's about. And at the end of the day, the one yardstick we should use to decide whether we're going to support something that's going to be beneficial for children is, will this help a child or a group of children learn? Period. That's what this man here and I talked about years ago when we, you know, got beat up pretty bad. But now we can both say that we played a small role in making sure that 2,000 kids each and every year get an education otherwise wouldn't receive, and nearly 90% of them are going to college every year. That wouldn't have happened if we hadn't been governed by that one simple yardstick. Will this help a child learn? And I think in Texas, if you want to learn something from what other states are doing, they're putting aside all the politics. They're putting aside all the adult issues, all the garbage, and they're focused on one thing: what's going to help these babies learn. And that's what I think you need to do here. Thank you.
And next we'll hear from former Secretary of Education, Rod Paige. Mr. Secretary?
I pass. I'm turning my time back over to Kevin. Let's listen to him talk some more. I want to begin by thanking Senator Patrick for his leadership. This state is blessed to have the leadership that he's provided for us. Senator Patrick, thank you very much for your leadership. And I think you got a little flavor of it, but let me tell you this. To talk like that in Washington, D.C. is dangerous. He found out when they ran him out of his city council seat because he was saying the right thing about children and kind of talking. You just heard him say he found it difficult to politic for his seat on the city council in Washington, D.C. They didn't want to hear talk about choice and those kinds of things. So now, for me, I think that's great for the nation because that freed him up to take this message broader across the cities and across the states. And we're beginning to see movement in those states that he talked about, in Tennessee and in Florida and in Louisiana, where this kind of work is being done. So I applaud you, Kevin. You've done great work, and we're blessed to have you here in Houston. Now, I could talk about the issues that I hope that we'll be able to accomplish in the legislative session this time, but Senator Patrick has already laid that out. And there's no sense in me repeating that. I just want to make a couple of points that tangentially fit in what we're talking about here. Despite the wonderful work by many teachers and principals and superintendents and school board members, despite their diligent work, we can say now that we're not making the kind of progress we need to make in order for Texas to continue to be and be even better a great state. I would put it this way. How we're working is not working. I want to give credit to the progress we're making. I don't want to be misunderstood to say that we're not making progress because we are making progress. But the point is we're not making the kind of progress we need to meet the competition in the future. I'll give you an example that I think makes it much more clearer. I pulled this out when I was preparing for my book, and so this is a little bit dated. And it's about the achievement gap between African Americans and Anglos in Texas, in the United States, where the gap is narrowing. And I was talking to some people who were bragging about the fact that we are making progress. And the point I'm making now is, yes, we're making progress. Problem is, we're not making sufficient progress. Between 1992 and 2009, the gap between fourth grade reading in African Americans and whites in the United States, there was a gap of 30 points. In 1992. In 2009, this gap had narrowed to 26 points. Now this means the gap closed 4 points in 17 years. That's a rate of 0.235 points per year. At this rate, it would take 110.64 years to close the gap. And so my point is that the progress we're making is not sufficient progress to put us where we want to be educational, and we have to change the way the system works. We're dealing not with the people, but the system has to be changed too. And we have to change a little bit on how we deal with the people. I'll share a little story with you, and this is about raising the morale of the people in the schools. And they got to play a part in this too and realize that there are some important changes they've got to make. In 2001, September 17, a few days after 1711, you remember that day because you saw President Bush standing on top of a car with a bullhorn, talking to the world about 9/11. I remember that too, but I remember more special that day because while he was talking to those people, I was talking to some teachers who taught in schools that were just a few blocks away from ground zero. And hearing their experience. And what I learned was, in my mind, if somebody said, airplanes are flying into a building less than 3 blocks from here, people are jumping out of the tall floors, places on fire, run for cover. But these teachers didn't run for cover. They ran to cover the kids and stayed with them until their parents could take them, which in some cases was over 24 hours. I could embellish that, but get that point. You just recently read or saw on television the story of teachers in Sandy Hook and how they conducted themselves in that dangerous situation. Many of them died as a result of their conduct. There are 3 more examples that happened just this year that I could share at that point. My point is that we've got to find a way to have them join us in the kinds of reform that Senator is talking about. Because there's one truism that I can promise you is going to happen. I promise you this truism that I learned from almost 8 years being a superintendent of one of the largest public school districts in the United States of America. And it's this: when schools change, I should say when and if schools change, they will do so as a result of the activities of the people inside the schools. Those outside the school can help support, can encourage, and cajole, but the bottom line is we got to get an attitudinal change for those inside the schools to make this change that we want to have happen and that we must have happen. So that's kind of a frontier that I think is going unattended to, that we need to pay a lot of attention to. Senator, there are 4 groups of strategies that you've adopted that I've just embellished and appreciate so much, because I think that's going to make a big difference in our state. But I just want to reinforce the one about online learning. This power of online learning is growing by leaps and bounds. We cannot allow that to run off and leave us. It can offer so much opportunity not only for financial efficiencies, but also academic efficiency for students learning. Just imagine a kid in a rural area in Texas who wants to take an advanced course in chemistry, or an advanced course in government, or an advanced course in any particular subject. But this school doesn't have the resources to bring in a specialized teacher in that subject because not enough kids in that school want to take this subject. What choice does that child have? Either leave that place and go to where they have this offered, or we can bring the choice to them. And that choice can be brought in by the kind of technology that's available right now. Properly regulated and properly managed, it's a too powerful tool to allow to leave. So that has to be embellished. I'll close now talking about one other subject that is dear to my heart that I learned. And that's been already spoken about, but I want to reinforce it. And that is choice. Almost every area of our life we have choice. We cannot, it is a necessary condition for the kinds of school operation that we want. It is a necessary condition. It isn't the kind of condition that would be nice to have. There cannot really be sufficient reform or sufficient efficiencies introduced into schools without choice. I'm proud to say that HISD has some of the widest choices of any school district in the United States. But even there, it could be expanded and provide more opportunities and choices for young people there. I played a little role in that, and I'm very pleased about that. And I think that some of the progress that this school district has made has been tied to their attitude about providing choice for kids. A kid should be free to go to any public school in the state. They should just be allowed to go there if it is their choice and the choice of their parents. Okay, thank you so much.
Mr. Secretary, thank you very much. We appreciate it. Most of you know, but our panelists don't, because I didn't tell them that occasionally I do interviews on KSEV Voice of Texas. So I'm going to interview each of you briefly and ask you a few questions. I want to start with the Secretary. Mr. Secretary, your national experience as Secretary of Education, you just mentioned choice. Tell us a little bit about the reforms that you tried to implement as Secretary of Education and the resistance that you encountered when you tried to bring the various interest groups into the decision to provide students with choices. Because when you were Secretary of Education, students didn't have very many choices. And if you don't mind, I would define choices as public schools, charter schools, parochial schools, and private schools.
Okay.
And homeschools.
One of the problems with the delivery system through schools that we have now is that we define public schools as a structure. When public schools, public is really a choice. It is a concept. It is something that provides everybody who's a part of the public access to. It doesn't mean that that's the only way in the world that you can do business. So it is not a structure. It is a concept. It means that you have access to it because of the graciousness of the public, and the public has it available to them through public means and public finance. So public is a much broader term than we've allowed it to be used with schools, and we define it as a certain fixed way that the school system has to be organized, managed, and governed. The next thing about that would be schools have to be institutions that serve the purpose that they say they serve. Many times that's not the case. Many big systems are economic delivery systems. There are ways to redistribute wealth. The amount of money that the systems operate is allocated in various ways based on issues that have nothing to do with the effectiveness of the school system and the effectiveness of the child. For example, one of the biggest things that interrupt policy and appropriate governance in public schools is jobs. They will fight you for jobs, and sometimes if jobs become conflicting with things that could help make students' life better in schools. And although there are wonderful school board members volunteering their time for work, but too many times we find the protecting jobs. And that really interrupts the effective use of the dollars that we have in schools. So anytime you start talking about a policy that conflicts with, and let me say this out loud, some union activity, you got a major problem, because they are going to be primarily focused on jobs and the well-being of their members. I got in some deep trouble like that and probably should have let that alone, but that is the case. And it caused many headaches that I had in this particular period of time, especially from the NEA, which was more active in this regard than others. So if there's anything that we can do to help with the governance, so that the governance is particularly aimed at activities that are going to be helpful for children. So I guess one of the things I'd suggest to you, all of you out there who got good ideas about school, you should run for the school board, be on the school board.
Thanks, Mr. Secretary. Kevin, I want to ask you about, if you don't mind, share your experience in Washington, D.C., because our audience probably is not as familiar with it as we are, having watched you but the objections you ran into in the reform movement, how you ended up with Michelle Rhee as superintendent, and then what happened after that, and how it, hopefully it hasn't ended, but where the Washington, D.C. public school system eventually ended up.
Well, I was on the D.C. City Council from 1993 to 2005. I took over the Education Committee in '97 at the same time we passed our charter school bill. And I remember I voted for the charter school bill, and speaking to the union representatives, they brought about 15 folks in my office after we passed the bill and I became chairman of the committee. It was one of the most powerful committees in the city. And they said, well, you know, we thought you had potential, but you voted for the charter bill. But now that you're education committee chair, you have the power not to fund them, so we're going to be watching you. And so then they all single file walked out, briefcases, dark suits. And I said to my staff, was I just threatened? I didn't, that, you know. And at first I was a novice in terms of education policy. I thought that was something school boards did. I didn't know much about it. You know, I'm confessing my ignorance. There's nothing, Dan, when you get out of office, you can confess your ignorance more. But I became a student of this stuff. I started reading up on it. I started talking to teachers. I realized that many of our great teachers in D.C., their biggest problem was dealing with the bad product they got from the teacher behind them, who, you know, they knew if so-and-so from these 5 kids from Miss Jones's class, they would have to take more time with them because Miss Jones can't teach and no one wants to do anything about it. I mean, I started getting those kind of direct, you know, stories and conversations from teachers, and it's true. And then these charter school folks, you know, we had the hospitality industry, Bill Marriott's based in D.C. He in the hospitality industry came to me and said, we want to start a hospitality high charter school. So kids, since D.C. is a tourist town, they can go into hotel restaurant management. We'll give them internships. Some may want to be chefs. They had a program set up so they could go to Paris. I mean, there was all this stuff. And I said, makes sense to me. So we did it. Then we had the seed school, a residential school, a public policy school, later a Chinese immersion. You know, you had all this stuff, and it was beginning to work. And before long, there were these waiting lists. And one of the smart things we did, we got a lot of the, you know, African-American clergy involved. They were involved in some of the boards. And these charter schools started taking off. And D.C. public schools was still fighting the change as opposed to embracing the change. Then, you know, when Secretary Paige and I got together on our scholarship bill, first of all, I thought that I was public enemy #1 when I supported charters. When I supported vouchers, you know, there wasn't even no label on it. You know, you just see my picture on the postcard, you know, on a big X. And a big X. In fact, when I ran for mayor in '98, one of the reasons why I lost is the union invested so much money near the end. They ran TV ads all over the city with my picture and a superimposed X. Very nice artwork, actually. You know, talking about, you know, Kevin Chavous hates your teacher and your kids. And, you know, my son, who was 7 or 8 at the time, you know, he came home from school all in a tizzy. Dad, why don't you like my teacher? You know, I said, pull up a chair. I'm arming you so you can go back to school tomorrow. So, you know, when I came out for the scholarship program, it was worse. I mean, they threw garbage in my house. They did all this stuff. They followed me around and heckled me. They got my schedule. So anywhere I spoke, I picked up my kid from school. They had people heckling. I mean, it was just relentless. And eventually it became an issue in my reelection, and they did me a favor, frankly. But I talk about all that because one of the people on my staff during all this, my committee clerk, was Adrian Fenty, and he became mayor of D.C. And, you know, he will tell you that he saw all this, but he became passionate about the issue, and he was someone who hired Michelle Rhee. And I knew them both very well and still do. And I think that a funny thing happened. As I said earlier, when you get more opportunities, when parents get more opportunities for choice, like I know even here sometimes people talk about, you know, we need to get rid of charter schools. They don't have those discussions in D.C. When you're at about 50%, you're here to stay. People don't talk about leaving. I mean, what you see more and more is real competition where, you know, with the reforms Michelle put in place in terms of trying to end automatic tenure and all that, now you got people are competing for these teachers and these principals. And that's made a huge difference. Now, DC test scores are slowly but surely starting to rise. So, you know, I would say in some, because y'all can tell I get long-winded and I'm gonna cut it out. One thing that Secretary Paige said, this is where I characterize it. We're so used to this over-allegiance to a public school system, which I think is still important, and the vast majority of kids will always go to the traditional be in the traditional public school system. But our challenge is to move from an over-allegiance to a system, a public school system, to a system of schools that work for children. And those system of schools can be in the form of any number of options, from charter schools, traditional public schools, parochial schools, private schools, home schools, virtual schools, specialty schools, magnet schools, by any means necessary if it's going to teach a kid how to learn. And then when you have that laboratory of innovative, it's like, you know, I don't like chicken fried steak. If I go to a buffet line and all they got is chicken fried steak, I may not eat that night. So you want a whole host of options, just like these parents who have to deal with different learning modalities for their kids. If you have more than one child, tell me if they're exactly alike. You can't do it. And they respond to different learning modalities. So once you put that out there, I'm telling you, we're beginning to see it in DC, we're seeing it in these other places, it makes a huge difference.
Thank you, Kevin.
Kevin, you probably have not had chicken fried steak in Texas.
You know, you owe me some cowboy boots. Years ago, you told me you'd get me some good cowboy boots.
Yeah, y'all gonna have to take it outside here. Okay, Kevin, I'm gonna do a follow-up question, okay? And this is on Louisiana, because I know you were there when Bobby Jindal introduced his reforms. But it was my understanding that part of this evolution in Louisiana was a result of the hurricane. It damaged the public school system in New Orleans. They had to go to charter schools and give everybody vouchers, and they went to private and parochial schools. And then a lot of the legislators in the New Orleans area liked what they saw. And why don't you take it from there?
Well, it's interesting, you know, and this is Secretary Duncan who said this, you know, the best thing that happened to the kids in New Orleans was the hurricane. Now, that was his quote. And unfortunately, he's true. I mean, you had many school board members who were in jail or on their way to jail. They had the worst outputs, one of the worst outputs in the city. You know, people were just taking money, you know, contract opportunities for family and friends of school board members. It was pretty bad, and the schools were bad. But a lot of resources came in and rebuilt New Orleans, and an interesting thing happened. You had some legislators from New Orleans who were fighting this because of the union issue, but then some of those same folks were trying to get their kids in some of these charter schools. I mean, it's just this real irony in, you know, you want what's best for me first. And then when Governor Jindal talked about spreading it out statewide, and the American Federation of Children, where I work now, we were involved in helping to drive that statewide effort. It was a result of a couple of reasons. One is the rest of the state still was suffering in terms of educational outputs for kids. And you all probably have experienced this with the rest of Texas, I guess. You know, whenever you're a big city in a state, you know, like they had New Orleans fatigue. Like they were tired of, you know, all this stuff with New Orleans, what about us? And you actually had people in Baton Rouge and in Shreveport and Monroe, Louisiana, all say, you know, we want this too. Our schools aren't working. And we actually now have this statewide bill. And as I said, within a matter of a couple of weeks, 10,000 parents signed up to be in this program. And so I think that it's like that expression Dr. King used to talk about, the right to vote. Once people get a taste of freedom, you know, once that genie's out the bottle, it's on. And I think it's the same with education reform. People don't know what they don't know. And one of the things we do, Senator, is we take legislators from other states to some of the states like in Florida, Milwaukee, D.C., and we take business leaders, parent groups, so we can excite the possibilities. they get to see for themselves, wow, you all have this going on? Because if you are used to a traditional school that's not working and that's all you know, then you're limited in terms of the vision and the possibility. So I do think that, and now, like I used to get beat up on because when I go to places, now, like some of y'all treat me like a rock star. I appreciate that. It's much better like that. And now people are they want this stuff. You know, I'm going to Alaska next week. People want this stuff. And that's because the traditional public schools aren't getting any better across the board. And as long as that output, that product is going to continue to be where it is, then people are going to be, it's like someone in the desert looking for water. You drink the sand if that's all you get. I mean, and that's what we're seeing. That now, with some of this positive changes, Louisiana, and I tell you what, we're very excited about what we see in Tennessee and North Carolina because we're seeing the same things. They're starting to reach out for more options for parents and kids.
Thank you, Kevin. We appreciate it. We're going to take your questions in a minute. I want to turn first, though, to Senator Patrick and ask Senator Patrick specifically about your plan, a couple of things. We just heard the other members of our panel discuss parental choice. And what I'd like is for you to tell the parents here and the parents that are listening on TV about the choices that you're going to provide them with your legislation and who supports those choices and who is opposing those choices.
First of all, I want to thank my two friends, one new friend, one old friend, I've known Dr. Paige a long time, for their courage. There are few issues at the end of the day that as an elected official, whereas Dr. Paige was a superintendent and then Secretary of Education, that you can truly look to and clearly see they are bigger than who you are. And education is one of those issues. It is the difference, in my view, of life and death for a young person. Their future. Which direction, which path do they go down in life? Do they go down the path of being a successful, productive citizen in whatever career they choose? Or are they poor and uneducated for the rest of their life, living off the government, often going to jail? We see a serve on criminal justice as well, and there's a common denominator between those behind bars, and it's a lack of education in many cases. I think about that child who sits on a doorstep in a poor neighborhood, who's really bright and just needs a chance, and he sees these college coaches come in and recruit the kid next door just because that kid can dunk a basketball or run a 440 or throw a football 80 yards. And we go out of our way to provide opportunities for an athlete. And I think about what that kid must be thinking. How about me? I count for something. And that's where we have to get to in this country, that realize every child has a future, and every child that we don't help, because as Kevin said, we get focused on adults or the system, or we let the unions muscle us, or those just who are blind to what choice can bring. We have to make that fight. And if that costs you an election, as Governor Bush said recently to me, so be it. That's the way I feel. You have to be willing to take the arrow. There was a leader in Indiana, his name is Tony Bennett, like the singer, who was a leader. Commissioner, they elect their commissioners of education, and brought about these fantastic reforms. And he was subjected to the same treatment recently that Kevin was years ago, and he was defeated and replaced by a union boss in Indiana. The good news is Florida, I think, had the wisdom to hire him to run their education system there. This is not an easy fight because you're threatening the turf of people. The struggles that or the things that I find most frustrating, I can take on those who are fighting selfishly against us because I can see where they're coming from. They don't really stand for what's right, they just stand for themselves. The struggle that I see are those on the outside who aren't fighting for themselves, they're just fighting for the wrong philosophy. They believe it's just about money and the public school system. And they fight against even the discussion. And I'm just beginning to get the kind of heat that he received and other leaders have received. You know, Jeb Bush recently gave a speech, and he's coming in to testify before our committee on February 27th. I'm looking forward to that day. 43% of all children born in poverty in America die in poverty. It's just, so this is worth the fight. In terms of choice, I just wanted to respond to what they're saying because I'm encouraged, you know, these are heroes. And they deserve your applause. The choices we want to give parents and students. First of all, as Dr. Paige said, go to any public school you want to go. And some school districts allow that, some don't. Some say they allow it, but they make it difficult. Go anywhere there's capacity. Secondly, cross district lines. I was out in West Texas when I was appointed chairman of education, I guess it's been 5 or 6 months ago. I decided to go around the state. You know, we have over 1,000 school districts, which means we have over 1,000 superintendents. And I wanted to go around the state and listen. So I went out to West Texas. I've been to the Valley. I've probably talked to 150 different superintendents. And when I went to West Texas, I was actually surprised when they told me how many students cross district lines because the distances are so great. The parents will make the difference. They will make those choices. That's why we need online learning, because a school doesn't, many of those districts have one high school. They don't have teachers teaching a certain course. You know, only 1 out of 3 math teachers in Texas and America has a degree in math. Only 1 out of 3 science teachers have a degree in science. So we need the best teachers teaching. So we need to be able to cross district lines. That's the 2 choices. Third, as we talked about, we need to lift the cap on charters, welcome the out-of-state charters coming in. Fourth, we're going to have a business scholarship tax credit for students that are 200% of reduced and free lunch who are in failing schools, our first target. And already I'm getting tremendous resistance, even from fellow Republicans as well as Democrats. As Kevin said, this is a bipartisan issue. My goodness, this is not about partisanship. This is about the future of our state. The individual, it's a moral issue that we don't limit the choice on a student or a parent to do anything else but where they go to school. And then we will have our Catholic schools, our Protestant schools, our Jewish schools, the entire private school sector, 98% of it anyway, supports our business tax credit plan, as does the business community. It would generate about, in my estimation, if we're able to fund it, 100 to 200 million a year, generate about 8,000 or 10,000 opportunities for students to have that opportunity. And I remind everybody that we already have choice in Texas. If you're wealthy enough, send your kids to wherever you want to send them. If you're not wealthy enough, but you have mobility, you move to the district of your choice. People don't sit in 1-hour traffic gridlock anywhere in America, but let's just talk about Texas. They don't sit in traffic on 290 in the morning because they like it. They sit there because they have moved to a school district that they believe is best for their children. Ask any realtor when someone's looking at a house, what is the #1 attraction besides maybe the price of the home and, you know, some of the amenities? It's the quality of the school district. So if you're wealthy, you have choice. If you're mobile, you have choice. But if you're in an inner city school, or maybe, and some of our rural schools as well, but let's focus on the inner city where the majority of our students who are failing live. If you're in an inner city school and you're a single mom and you depend on public transportation to go to your job, you don't have mobility. You're not making the money to send your child to private school. So why do we say to that woman or that grandparent or that man, why do we say to that family, sorry, you don't have choice? I've joked at times, and I would have done this except the blogosphere we live in would have misinterpreted it. But I said, what if I passed a bill that said you're not allowed to send your child to private school, no matter how much money you had? You're just not allowed. I wouldn't get 1 vote. People would say, what do you mean, Dan? You can't limit my choice to send my child where I can afford to send them? Or what if I said you can't move out of your district? You can't move to Tomball to go to that grade school, or Katy, or Sci-Fair. You can't do it. We're not going to let you. People say, you can't. So why do we tell an inner city parent, you have no choice? It's un-American. It's immoral, and it must change.
Thanks, Senator.
Let me stress on that.
Certainly, Mr. Secretary.
I so much identify with exactly what the senator said, but I want to add something to that. This child in an inner city school that's not serving them well, and they don't have the funds to move to another district or another school system, they also have a choice. And too many of them are electing that choice. That choice is to stay in that school that they're not happy with or drop out. And they're making that choice faster than they should.
Well, we're going to take a few questions from our live audience as well as our internet audience. So if you please will be very brief and very targeted in your question. We'll ask our panelists to respond, and then we'll take some questions that were being fed via the internet from our live audience all over the state of Texas. So, and Gina has the microphone back there, so please be brief and specific. Thank you.
Excuse me, I need my glasses. I think many of you are familiar with Milton Friedman and George Will. I have a short quote here from each of those before I make a comment on a couple of things. On Milton Friedman, he says, government's problem is whom they subsidize. They could subsidize the producer or the consumer. They'd choose to subsidize the producer, the school. If the student was subsidized, the consumer, there would be competition. The student could choose the school he attends, and that would force schools to improve and meet the demands of the students.
So your question, please.
And the issue here is George Will basically says the same thing. I think we need to look at competition and fairness. These, I'd have to read you the other two to emphasize competition, but one is satisfactory. The second thing is fairness. We need to consider the fairness of the parents that pay the property taxes and have to pay a second time at a parochial or private school. That being unfair, and a second point about that is what would happen if Monday morning every parochial and private school would say, we're shutting down. Okay. And the burden would be put on the public schools to have money, rooms, and everything. That would cost a lot of money, at least give them that much.
Okay, I think I get it. So the question for our panel is, should taxpayers have to pay, in his words, twice, once for the public schools, and if they send their children to private or parochial schools, then they have to pay again for that education?
Well, one of the reasons why we have our tax code, theoretically, is to make sure that we have a better America. We fund those priorities that the government is responsible for. And this is the way I look at it. Do you know that if we increase the high school graduation rates in this country by 10%, we reduce the murder rate by 20%? Do you know right now California pays more for prisons than they do for schools? And they're in bankruptcy. Before we start complaining about paying taxes, I know that wasn't your question, but some people say, well, why should I have my money that I pay, since I'm in this great school district, you know, why should my tax dollars go to help these kids in the neighboring school district that's not as good? Well, you're investing in your country, and you're frankly investing in yourself. Because either we get this right for everybody, or every other body is going to be a predator on our walled-in community. And that's just the reality. You know, at the end of the day, if we do the things we need to provide quality options for these families, particularly those in affected neighborhoods, we grow the educational outputs, we reduce the crime and murder rate. Not only that, but like McKinsey said in their landmark study that Dr. Paige knows about a couple of years ago, you know, we will increase. Right now, if we had closed the achievement gap, our failure to close the achievement gap that he's been talking about for years has led to a permanent national recession larger than one we're experiencing. It's led to our being non-competitive internationally. And if we had closed the achievement gaps that exist in this country, it would add $2 to $4 trillion to our GDP. So there's a public safety issue. As Senator says, there's a moral issue. There's a patriotic American issue, and there's an economic issue. And at the end of the day, guess what? Those tax dollars, if they're used the right way to fund the systems of schools that work, not just the one producer as you talked about, it will end up saving America in the long run, because we wouldn't have to spend money on the prison system and the crime stuff that we read about every day.
Thank you. Senator Patrick, the second question was, if all the religious parochial schools were closed tomorrow, could the public school system even handle the students? The clamor is always for more money. Or Secretary Paige, if you want to take this when Senator Patrick's done.
Well, just very quickly, you're absolutely right. If all of our private schools and homeschoolers poured back into the system tomorrow, it would put a tremendous burden on our finance system, as well as capacity issues. In fact, those students in our private schools and homeschools are doing other taxpayers a great service, actually, and our state a great service, tying into what Kevin said. But I do agree with Kevin. This is a shared responsibility. We will not be able to build the walls high enough to live behind. You know, some of my, Ben asked earlier, who's against this? We have a lot of inner city Democrats who oppose this policy in Texas, and rural Republicans, because rural Republicans get pressure from their superintendent. What's in it for me? Why should we care? We should all care. Condoleezza Rice is the first person that has done a study on how education impacts national security. And what she said is that 75% of our high school graduates who apply for the military do not pass the entrance test. Now, some of it's obesity, some of it's drug problems, but a significant portion of those who apply to the military can't pass the academic test. And she said, at a time when we're reducing our force strength in terms of personnel, because technology is the new military, we have to have students and new people coming in the military intelligent enough to operate the technology. So we have to make that shared investment, and we are all in this together.
Thanks, Dan. Specific targeted questions, please. Thank you.
Yes, I've got a specific question for Mr. Patrick. My wife and I drove down from the Woodlands today. We were firm supporters in public schools till our first boy, we have 3 boys, got into kindergarten. He's exceptional. He taught himself to read at age 3. He was very bored in kindergarten. All the other kids learning letters. He's reading at probably a 2nd or 3rd grade level at that point. He got in a lot of trouble with, being bored. We asked the teacher, can we get some more advanced work for him? She said that wouldn't be fair to the 1st grade teachers. So at that point, we pulled him out and we homeschooled him the next semester of kindergarten. And now he attends what's called a university model school, where he spends 2 days a week in classroom instruction and two days a week or 3 days a week being homeschooled by my wife. He reads at a 4th grade level now. He does 2nd grade level math. He's a 1st grader. All that is done at the cost, half the cost of what Texas spends. We spend about $4,000 a year to send him to a university model school. I've got 2 other boys, and we intend to stick with this system because it really works for him. So my targeted question is, will your school choice bill help us? We pay our taxes. I'm a veteran. I'm a voter. We do everything right, and we're taking responsibility to educate our own children, and we'll do it better than the government-run schools can do it. All we want is at least half of our money back to go spend it.
Thank you very much. We appreciate it.
First of all, you're blessed. Second of all, I know how much of a sacrifice homeschool parents pay. It's not easy. Third, the answer is no. The way the Florida system was set up and the way we're setting our system up to begin was to address students who are in public schools that are failing. We simply don't have the money to say to the 300,000 students who are homeschooled and the 250,000 who are in private schools in Texas, 550,000 students, that we can now step in and reduce your taxes in half. We simply don't have the money. And I wish we did, but we don't, because you're helping bring down the cost of education. I would like to think that one day soon, and I see you shaking your head back there, I would like to see one day soon we can do that. But we're going to have to take one step at a time. And the first step we're going to have to take is trying to rescue students in our failing schools and families that don't have the opportunity that you have. And that is a choice that the families make and the sacrifice you have made. I totally support your position. Totally support. I mean, if I were king, and we don't live in a monarchy, I have to have votes. And there are no votes. There are no votes to support reducing the property tax or the school taxes for students who decide to send their students to private school or homeschool. But I agree that I think we should, and I think you're right, and I know your frustration.
No votes yet. Thank you, Senator. Next question, please. Specific question. Thank you.
Okay. Briefly, I was an HISD school teacher. My mother and grandmother and grandfather are all school teachers, along with dozens of other family members, so we are school teachers. 6 years ago, I adopted an at-risk child at the age of 9, disadvantaged child, brought that child into the public school system, and I'm walking daily at what a disadvantaged child does and sees at school every day. No child left with a mind is terrible. It needs to be abolished. It's emotional child abuse. Not every child is going to be able to pass these tests or excel on these tests. That does not mean they cannot succeed in society. Every child needs to be taught to be a good citizen and be a good person first and foremost, and that there's a place in this world for everyone. These tests are abusive emotionally. These kids,
so Miss, I'm sorry, what's your question?
These kids feel defeated. After all of my experiences in public schools, I really support a voucher system. Give the money to this man, give the money to the parents, give the money to the private school people, and let them educate the children, their own children. They love that child, and the state does not. If you want to make this voucher program a success, you're going to have to expose the lobbyists and their corruption. The textbook lobbyists are selling books for our schools that are horrible. They're much more difficult than these children can do. The reading books and material aren't even literature. Someone is being sold a bill of goods. There's a lot of corruption, and that's one of the reasons why our schools are failing.
Ma'am, your question,
Why
please.
Not the voucher system? That is my question.
Okay.
Why the incrementalism?
Okay, first let me ask Secretary of Education Rod Paige. We spend billions of dollars on education every year. I think the education budget is probably up to 60 or 70 billion a year. Is there anything available from the federal government that would help this lady or this gentleman, these parents that have these concerns?
The federal government supplies about 9% of the finances used to run public in K-12 public schools. When I left the cabinet, there was about total state, local, and national funds that we spend in public education was somewhere in the neighborhood of $525 billion annually. So, but the buck of that comes from taxes, local and state. Well, all of it comes from taxes because federal 9% or so is taxes money also. But I know of no particular system that would provide what you are explaining, except that which exists in Washington, D.C., called a Washington, D.C. scholarship program that Kevin has been talking about. It is the only national program where federal funds are expended to provide scholarships for young people.
Thank you. We'll take one more question, and I want to take a couple of questions from our viewers who are tuned in on our broadcast. Please go ahead.
My kids go to this charter school, and it's fantastic. What is the percentage of charter schools for the rest of HISD, and what is the projection for 2 and 4 years from now? Because as it stands, we're, for lack of a better word, scared of leaving the Heights because we don't want to get out of this school, and at what is it, 5 year or 5th grade, we have to move. So what is the projection for 2, 5, 10 years from now for Houston?
If we're successful in lifting the cap on charters, then the future is bright. Right now we have a cap of 215. We've been around 209 for several years because we lose a few, we add a few. If we can't lift the cap,
Sorry, we can't hear you. So.
Well, Houston is part of the cap. I mean, we have 215 in the state. So we're asking to lift the cap. We're asking for full facilities funding. You know, Yvette was fortunate here. She was able to take over this building. A lot of charters can't get started because they don't have the cash flow to begin the business. There's a group called Choose to Succeed in San Antonio that's providing that cash flow. I'm going to ask for full facility funding.
Right. So under your proposal, Dan, the cap would be lifted and it would attract all the charter schools in the country to the state of Texas, including the Houston area, and you would have almost unlimited charter school opportunities. And then to address the prior question, under your proposal and the tax credit that you're proposing, would her family and her kids be eligible if she wanted to send her kids to a charter school, a parochial school, or a private school to apply for a scholarship?
No, and just going back, and our gentleman and the lady here said, you know, I want it now, I don't want incrementalism. We're turning around the Titanic, and it's going to take some steps. Secondly, and I should have said this to the gentleman before he left, the homeschool, oh, he's still here, the homeschool association that parents support was the only group that supported me when I ran for office in 2007. No one else supported me except them. And the one thing they said to me then, and they continue to say to me now, we don't want any strings attached. And the Homeschool Association is concerned that if there were any givebacks or tax credits, that suddenly there would be public strings attached to homeschoolers. So you have to talk to your association to begin that move as well. And the third thing is, and I understand what you're saying, and I agree with you, but I could also have a senior stand up in this crowd who doesn't have any children in school and say, wait a minute, what about me? I don't have any kids in school. I've paid my dues. Why should I pay school taxes? I mean, we could start going down these exceptions of various reasons, and as Kevin said, it is part of what we have to do because 90% of our students will be in public schools.
Well, I don't know the answer to this question, so I'd ask. District charter schools, are they counted under the cap? Are they not counted under the cap?
If they're a homeroom charter, they're not, but we don't have any home rule charters, so
okay.
All charters.
You asked specifically about Houston. The Houston Independent School District had 21 charter schools before the state law for charter schools started. So the answer to your question would be charter schools sponsored by or chartered by the district are not limited.
Right.
They're limited only by the vision of the school board.
So, Mr. Secretary, why is it then that the superintendent and the school board of HISD won't allow more charter schools within the school district of Houston? Well, that's the obvious question.
Yeah, it is the obvious question, and I can only say that we have to talk to the current superintendent, the current school board.
I'm asking you to speculate based on your vast experience. Hypothetically, of course.
I don't know the answer to that question. I don't know the answer to that question. I can simply say that at one time, Houston School Board chartered 21 charter schools, big charter schools that are operating very efficiently. As a matter of fact, KIPP started as a charter school, as an HISD charter school, and it only went to become a state charter school because there was about $200 or $300 difference in the allocation of funds to them, not because of the support that the district was getting.
And part of our reform bill is also going to change the homeschool charter rule. I can't remember if I said that earlier. Currently, you have to have about a 25% vote to become a public charter or a home rule charter district. We're going to change that if we can pass the legislation, so it's just a school board decision. I'm hoping that brings some of our rural districts in, because they could become entire charter districts or specific schools in any district. Spring Branch, for example, has the SKY program, which is Spring Branch, KIPP, and YES, where they've actually taken certain schools and turned those schools under the management of KIPP in Spring Branch. Very innovative. Duncan Klusman is a very innovative superintendent. So I can't answer your specific question, but we're sure trying to get you to where you want to be.
I'm going to read a few questions from our live audience watching at home. This is for the Secretary. Mr. Secretary, as the former superintendent of HISD, why do you believe that Texas is so far behind other states in providing school choice?
Innovation would be one idea. You know, I think as we talked about school boards being innovative and thinking about this concept and finding ways under the present law to have chartered schools, chartered by the school board. School board members are elected officials, and they're representing their view of their constituents. And many of them see this as giving in to ideologies that they don't particularly embrace. I think that's completely wrong, but that may be one of the explanations. The other explanation is the political environment that exists at that time. I think it's getting much better than it was, but there has been a good deal of resistance to the idea of choice. But I think it's softening up now because there are very few aspects of our life where we are bottled into a situation where there's no choice. We all know monopolies don't work. We know this. And so there's no exception about how you operate schools, that they work better on the side of monopoly. They do not. And besides, I would say this to my colleagues who are in the school business, that people who talk about can we survive? I would say get rid of that kind of talk, because we can not only survive, we can prevail. But it comes down to there are many, many great, what we would refer to now as public schools. And all we got to do is make sure all of them operate like that. That's the problem.
Yeah. And real quick, one of the things that I'm really concerned about are school board elections. I have learned recently in our bigger districts that there's big money going into back candidates.
Yeah.
Big money.
Big money.
Going in. You know, you think of school board election of, you know, a parent who steps up and says, hey, I want to make a difference. No, it's becoming as political as any other race. And so the average parent who says, I want to make a difference, gets shut out. So what do you have very often elected in your bigger districts? You have people elected to the school board who have been backed by textbook companies, other vendors who have a lot at stake to not go along with the things we're talking about today. And then those school board officials often run for the state legislature. We have a lot of former school board members in the state legislature, so they come in with a mindset, and look, the other side is dug in, not for what is best for the student, what's best for their company or best for their union.
Thank you. This one's for Kevin Chavous. Boy, someone's really done their homework here. In Texas, Democrats in elected office appear to be opposed to school choice. As President Obama's former education advisor, how do we convince Democrats to support school choice?
Well, more and more are coming on board. I was a founder of and board chair of Democrats for Education Reform. And frankly, in Louisiana, for instance, our statewide voucher bill, we had an African-American Democrat from New Orleans in the Senate who was the lead sponsor, African-American Democrat in the House, lead sponsor, working with Governor Jindal. And, you know, we've seen the same thing beginning to take place in Tennessee. In Florida, when they passed their school choice bill the first time, you know, about 13 years ago, you know, no members of the Black Caucus or Hispanic Caucus voted for it. When it came up for reauthorization last year, a majority of both the Black and Hispanic Caucus, mainly Democrats, all voted for it. The reality is that when parents, you get that whiff of freedom, as I said, that choice and the exposure to choice, these constituents begin to speak. In Florida, they had the largest rally for school choice ever, 5,000 parents and students. And a lot of those Democrats said, you know, hey, you know, our constituents are benefiting. And the biggest barrier to some of these folks coming on board anyway has been the money. It's been the union and system money. I can't tell you how many times I've spoken at some of these largely Democratic, urban Democratic crowds and had, after I finished, a couple of those elected officials come to me and say, keep saying what you're saying, doing what you're doing. I can't do that because they'd run me out of office, because I can't fund my campaigns, or I can't go against the union. But I think that there's power in the parents stepping forward. And, you know, we're seeing these parent union groups, parent revolution groups popping up all over the country, Parent Trigger, and it was Democrats for Education Reform Democratic legislator who did the first parent trigger law, Gloria Romero, in California. Now it's popping up all over. So the reality is that, you know, more and more folks are starting to look at this not just as a partisan issue, and some are stepping out because we can't keep doing what we're doing to these kids. And that's what I say, we're doing it to the kids. It's not like they can't learn. Well, some people may be misguided and believe that. But it really is what we're doing to the kids. And I think that's why you're seeing more and more Democrats. But you know what? We need to be equal opportunity. And Senator Patrick knows this, so does Secretary Paige. You know, a lot of states I've gone to where they have Republican majorities in the House and the Senate, Republican Democrats, they can't get a bill passed for expanded choice or expanded charters because of the rural Republican education bureaucracy and establishment. And so at the end of the day, let's focus less on the partisanship that gets in the way of it and more on exciting the possibilities by looking at the examples of those that have it.
And to underscore that, just so I was telling a writer about this yesterday, and it was kind of like a light went off. In Texas, each senator represents 811,000 constituents. Mine all live in West Harris County. Out in West Texas, a senator might have to have 40 counties and 100 school districts. I represent 9. So he has 100 superintendents in the rural areas who are saying don't do this. In the inner cities, the unions are telling the Democrats not to do it. That's the political power. But here's the bottom line in the Texas Senate. It takes 21 votes to bring a bill to the floor. There are 19 Republicans. I need to get all my Republicans on board. And then I need 2 Democrats. Eddie Lucio, a Latino Democrat from the Valley, is the one who presented the business tax credit last session. I specifically asked for him to be my vice chair. He's the vice chair. He's with us. So if I can keep my Republicans together as 19, I don't have all 19 yet, and Senator Lucio is 20, I need 1 more Democrat out of the remaining 11, and we can move the bill. It is numbers. And then the House will have to make that decision. And by then, I think there'll be a world of influence coming to Texas.
So who do we need to go see? Give me those names.
I will give you the names.
We'll knock on some doors. Let's go knock on some doors. Y'all want to go? Let's go knock on doors.
Well, I was going to ask the senator, the question I had was, do you have the votes? So
we're within a couple of votes. And one other thing, and look, because I see some reporters around here, so it's good to report these stories. We're going to have a special session because of the lawsuit. In a special session, we don't require 21 votes. We require a simple majority of 16. And I am not giving up this fight. Not giving up this fight. And I believe the Senate will move this legislation with the Lieutenant Governor is totally on board, the Governor is totally on board, and it's going to go to the House. And the decision there will be between 95 Republicans and 55 Democrats, if I know the count right. And they need 76 votes.
Yeah. And finally, I want to ask Kevin if he can talk the President into supporting school choice.
You know, it's funny. I was on Obama's Education Policy Committee the first time around, and in fairness, the last 2 presidents, Bush and Obama, have done a lot to move the ball forward on charters and on other aspects of choice. He has not come around on vouchers. I do think that is something that he pressed the union pressed him about, and they drew a line in the sand. It makes no sense to me. I fought he and his folks over it. I've run TV ads. I've done all this stuff. You know, they know who I am, so I make sure I pay my taxes. But you know, it's funny. We now have a lot of celebrities and athletes who we're engaged in at the American Federation of Children who are supportive of this issue. And so I've been working with Jalen Rose and Lisa Leslie, and we're talking to several of them. And so I was with Lisa Leslie in Atlanta. We met with the governor, and we had a school choice rally during School Choice Week. And she did an interview on CNN with Suzanne Malveaux. And Suzanne Malveaux said, have you ever been asked to play basketball at the president? And this is what Lisa Leslie said. She said, well, I was asked a couple of times, but I couldn't go, and Mr. President, I'm sorry, I would love for you to invite me again. But if he did invite me to come back and play basketball for him, I'd block his shot and tell him he should support school choice. And so I think what's gonna change the needle is going to be organic. You know, the beautiful thing about our democracy, the beautiful thing about this thing is that the people do rule. It takes a little while, and this is one where we got to lead the leaders. You know, at the end of the day, sometimes our leaders are behind the curve. They were behind the curve on civil rights. They were behind the curve on a lot of different issues. But over time, the public just sort of says, you know what, we've had enough of the shenanigans. We had enough of the small-mindedness. We've had enough of the incompetency, and we've had enough of a one-size-fits-all approach to educating children that doesn't work. And at the end of the day, that's what is happening. It's almost like that Berlin Wall moment. I remember when, years ago, I heard, you know, Reagan point to Gorbachev and say, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down that wall. Next thing you know, they were picking up pieces of the wall. I said, where did that come from? You know, the Cold War was just over. And at some point in time, this monopoly is going to end because the people want it to end. You know, it is clear the people want it to end, and that's what's going to make a difference.
Well, Mr. Secretary, I think Kevin's had his summation. I'll go to you, and then we'll finish with Senator Patrick.
Well, all I'll say is ditto what Kevin just said, okay?
Thank you.
And when that wall comes down, our friend from the Woodlands, that's when we will recognize that people who follow choice on their own should receive a financial impact credit for that. That's when that will happen, when the entire movement. And I will just real quick close with this. I've been on education for 6 going on 7 years. I've been the vice chair the last 2 years. Now I have the honor of being the chairman of a system of 5.7 million, about half our budget. I've never seen in my 7 years the movement building behind me that I'm seeing now. These gentlemen who are here, Americans for Prosperity, the foundations, we did a press conference a few weeks ago, Texans for Greater Schools. The business community, when I laid out my Senate Bill 3 on career business and college readiness, 19 industries standing behind me saying we must have change in our schools so we have qualified workers and students ready to go to college. I'm seeing the movement. It is organic, and it's happening. And for those in the Capitol, in either party, those who don't see this are blind. The public wants it. The business community has to have it. The education community needs it. And the one thing we have not talked about today, and we ought to close with this, let's recognize we have so many great teachers and great principals and great superintendents. And part of what we want to do when we talk about flexibility and empowerment that I mentioned, we also want to get out of the way of the next Michael Feinberg. We want to get out of the way of the next event, who started as a teacher here and now leads the school. Because we do have, as Dr. Paige said, a teacher who will put their life on the line to protect a student will do whatever it takes to teach that student if we give them the tools and we get out of the way. And so I want to honor those who understand and who are leading and who are courageous in their classrooms as well.
Mr. Secretary, you wanted to?
Well, I just want to make my comment by expressing my appreciation to Americans for Prosperity for this, giving us this opportunity to make these expressions and for bringing this important issue to the public domain.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Gentlemen, thank you very much. This concludes our live broadcast. Our panelists will be around for a while to take questions from the press. Our press secretary, Gina Cook, if you'd like to speak to her, she'll handle any questions that you may have. I also want to especially thank the Houston Heights Learning Academy, Yvette East, all the teachers and employees of the Academy, award-winning National Title I Distinguished School for Excellence. Thank you very much for opening up your facility today. And of course, you, the audience, thank you very much for coming, and all our parents and teachers and taxpayers listening at home. We appreciate your participation. Thank you very much for coming.